Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Heidi Krupp. I'm the CEO of the Krupp Agency, and I'm thrilled to be sitting down today with my client and colleague and friend, Dr. Frank Anderson. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Well, I'm thrilled about it. Let me introduce you so more people know all of what I've been able to learn, and I think more people are going to learn about you. Dr. Frank is a world renowned trauma treatment expert and a Harvard trained psychiatrist and psychotherapist. He is the acclaimed author of Transcending Trauma, co author of Internal Family Systems Skill Training Manual, and now the author of a new book that we're so privileged and honored to be able to be promoting called To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. Dr. Frank is also the co founder of the Trauma Institute and the Trauma Informed Media, both organizations that are promoting trauma awareness, education, integration, and healing in the entertainment and education worlds. Dr. Frank says that pain and trauma are universal, that we each have the capacity to be hurt and hurt others, and that healing from these invisible wounds and trauma is attainable. So, in the spirit of Mental Health Awareness Month, we wanted to share and discuss Dr. Anderson's incredible story, which I know will uplift and encourage all of you who may be lost in your own trauma, and to release what you're holding and leave your trauma in the past. Dr. Frank, thanks so much for joining us today for this very important conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's great. Great to be here. And I love getting my message out to the world in any way that's possible. So thanks for doing this.
Oh, no, no, thank you. So, take me from the beginning. When I first met you and we had our first phone call, I mean,
Yeah.
just a little full disclosure here. I was living in Hawaii. I always, whenever I've met various clients that have come into my life, they all come at the exact time I need. And I remember our very first chat, you were talking about trauma,
Yeah.
and I was hearing about the book, and I was going through something very personal for me, with our son, Caden, who was being bullied at school. And I could barely even contain myself that we even were having this conversation. So, for me, this is real personal. And I think for many people, this has become personal. And I think the world, so many people now are just like stuck in their trauma. So I guess my first question to you is, does everyone have trauma?
I know this trauma word is kind of activating for people these days. Like
Sure.
some people are, oh my gosh, everything is trauma. And other people get really like adverse to the world. Like, not me. That doesn't happen to me. My personal experience and the way I like to describe it to people is everyone has overwhelming life experiences, and there's a range of them. Some of them are horrific, the things you see on movies or read in books, and some of them are these small accumulations that over time become significant. So yeah, I do think I think that's what we're here for, is to learn through adversity. And I think everybody experiences adversity. I've never met anyone, Heidi, who hasn't gone through something in their lives. So it is my view that we all experience it, but I'm careful to use the word trauma because it freaks some people out, honestly.
Well, right, because then they get defensive and then they get
Right.
worried about it. And I mean, in our situation for us, I mean, my son was 12 years old and he was bullied, and a little boy, just to put the context to the story, had
Yeah.
told him on Snapchat that he deserves to die and he should
Right.
kill himself like Hitler. And this was before the horrible things that happened in Israel and Gaza. So it was a real moment for me of, there was a difference between overwhelm and,
Right.
but I knew that I felt different than I had ever felt before in a point of overwhelm. I think I definitely had what one would diagnose as post-traumatic
Yeah.
stress disorder, because I think it was something that I'd never. So how do you help people understand the difference between overwhelm and trauma, and when do they go to get help? Like, is there a way to help someone identify the differences between those things?
It's a great question because it really does matter around what we experience and what our responses are to it. That's really an important thing to differentiate and to distinguish because some people can experience being bullied at school and it kind of gets normalized because they've grown up in a dysfunctional family. And so it's like, oh, I get bullied at home and I get bullied at school. That can have a differing effect on somebody who really has had a pretty good childhood by and large, and then has this event. So we're
Mhm.
always thinking about the individual and how they perceive it and how they respond to it. The responses are important. Sometimes people shut down, they get withdrawn, totally dissociated, right? Disconnected. That's one type of response. Other people get panicked, overwhelmed, they start drinking. Like when you notice, just like you did, Heidi,
Oh, I
notice
was
like
drinking. I started drinking when this happened, Dr. Frank. I'm not gonna lie.
right? Right? It's like you're doing
Drank
whatever
too
you
many
can.
tequilas. Yeah.
You're doing whatever you can to survive. And so we're looking at those responses as clues. Like, what do those responses mean? And more importantly, what are they protecting or trying to keep us away from? Most people, Heidi, don't know that most of our responses are really trying to help us manage overwhelming experiences. So that curiosity is key to differentiating it.
So that's really fascinating. I've never heard anybody say it like that before, that like when these things happen, you should be curious as to what it is that you could be learning, or however your response is. If you respond to it in a way that's calm, then that can help the person that's going through it be calm. So a lot of it is the stuff that we're in control of, which is our reactions. So before I get too carried away,
Yes.
let's go back, because I love to always know what was the backstory that led us here. Tell me about you. How did you begin? Yeah, how did you begin? What's your backstory, Frank? What made you become a therapist? Tell me about your childhood, or things that, like, I know you wrote this incredible book. I have the galley here, because I have hot off the press, the hardcover is coming. This
Yeah.
was I read this in one plane trip to Dallas in 3.5 hours. I could not put it down. It was amazing. Really, it's like it was speaking to me, and I felt like I was healing through you. So tell me about you. Tell me about how this all came to be.
I love hearing you say that because that is actually the main purpose of writing this book. Honestly, I telling people about my own trauma history as a trauma expert who's been in this field since 1992 to let people know that trauma is universal and in fact it can be healed. My backstory is a complicated one. It really goes back to childhood, early childhood. It goes back to the book opens when I'm 6 years old, and my parents say to me, "You're not going to school today, Frankie." They sent me to psych testing, and I was in therapy for 6 years as a child, from 6th grade. From first I was in therapy as a child from 1st grade all the way through 6th grade. And
Mm,
at the time, I had no clue about what was going on. I suppressed everything. I was one of those suppressors, right? My
mm,
dad was yelling at me. He was violent. He was physically abusive.
mm.
And the message to me growing up was always like, you're the problem. There's something wrong with you. So, what I did as a smart little kid was I suppressed who I was. And I was like trying to behave like a good little boy so my parents would love me. So, my story, that's where it kind of starts. When you
But you
read the
didn't
book,
know. But you didn't know that that's what you didn't know as a little boy, that you were suppressing anything. I
had
mean,
no clue. But what ended up happening, which I talk about later in the book, is I was actually in a form of conversion therapy. Honestly, I got caught playing with a Barbie doll in my cousin's basement and I got yelled at for it. Right. And in those days, back in the day, being
you weren't
gay was a
allowed to be gay.
disorder. You were not allowed to be gay. And they put me in therapy. My parents were actually well intended, believe it or not. Right. They wanted to make me fit in and not have a psychiatric disorder. But it was a horrible setup for me around you're wrong. you're bad, you need to change in order to be loved, right? And my dad had his own set of issues. How much of them were related to me and how much of them were related to him, I can't really tell you the differentiation around that, but he was violent. He yelled and screamed, chased me around the house. So I had this complicated history, and I did everything in my power to behave, to be a good little boy, and to kind of not get hit or beaten or yelled at anymore. So I ended up, for me, the salvation was good grades. I was one of those kids that was a straight A student, and that was kind of my ticket out of the house and the way that I thought I can get affirmed in life. What ended up happening, I watched in college Ordinary People, and it was a
Mm,
movie that was
wonderful.
shown, right? It was shown like by one of the fraternities at the University of Illinois. I was stunned when I watched that movie. It was this bizarre, and I had no idea why at the time, because it was this combination of, oh my goodness, I want to be Judd Hirsch. I want to help people who are in pain. So I
Oh,
totally identified
here
with
I go.
him. But at the same time, I was totally resonating with the Timothy Hutton character.
Mhm.
I didn't know my trauma had gotten activated. I didn't even know what it was, but I was feeling something so powerful. Like I felt his pain and I wanted to help. Another huge thing that happened in my life was that a very close family friend had a psychotic episode
Oh,
when
yeah, that
I
was in the
was
book. What, Mateo?
Mateo had a psychotic episode when I was first in high school and then in college, and he was very close in our family. It devastated me to see this kid at 14 years old having psychotic episodes, and it just was like, again, felt the pain inside, had no clue about it, but desperately needed to help him and to save him. And then, the last event was really when I was in my psychiatric residency program at Harvard, and I'm sitting every day with homeless people who have no insurance and they are totally on their own with no family support. Sitting with them, being the therapist for them, every one of them had horrible trauma histories. And it
Oh,
was then that my system got kind of blown up inside and I dove into therapy. I was like, I have to figure out what's going on for me. And it was then for the first time, that I started learning, hey, something was really going on in your childhood and you had a bad trauma history. So it took me a while to figure it out based on my history.
so do you think so it's, first of all, what an extraordinary story and so brave that you were able to look at it that way. But when you were going through it, you probably had no idea why you wanted to save people, fix people. I mean, it was probably you were trying to just, as you say, to be loved. You were looking to be loved yourself. And I
Right.
think that to me, there's so many people that are looking for that. I mean, I think we all choose professions that are going to do something that help us become, but we don't know that when we're in it. And then,
No.
and as parents, it's hard to, certainly sort that through. So, how are you able to process your own trauma, Frank? Like, what steps did you take personally towards, healing for yourself?
Well, when I was in my residency program, as I said, and I was so overwhelmed by sitting with these people who were homeless, suffering from severe mental health issues, I really got so overwhelmed. It was almost hard to function in my residency program. And I shot myself into therapy. I was like, all right, I may have been in therapy as a kid against my will at 6 years old. But as an adult, I was like, I have got to do something about this. So I went to therapy. And I'm in Boston area. It's a very like psychoanalytic,
Mhm.
psychodynamic area. I was in therapy, Heidi, 5 days a week for 11 years. Like, it was crazy if I look back at it now, but I was so stirred up by the whole thing, and I was desperately trying to figure out what in the heck was wrong with me. At one point, we thought I had multiple personality disorder because I had so much stuff going on inside, and it was really through that therapy that I start getting clarity. Like, I was married to a woman during that time. Remember, I did the right thing and I was doing what I was supposed to do. So I was living this false life. And as the layers started unpeeling about what was really going on for me, as I did what we call the U-turn and
Mhm.
started looking at myself instead of
U-turn.
healing others,
We need a
do
lot of U-turns these
we
days. Yeah.
need a lot of U-turns, right? Because we're so focused externally and people don't take the time to look inside. It's so painful. But as I did that slowly, and as I started getting a sense of, hey, I had a really rough childhood. It was very interesting for me. Everybody's different with their journey of healing, Heidi.
Mhm.
I had to heal my trauma before I was able to come to terms with my sexual orientation, with my identity. So
Mhm.
for me, it was trauma first, identity second. So at
Mhm.
32 years of age, I ended up coming out and divorcing my wife. And it was then, for the first time in my life, I kind of felt like me. I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I came home for the first time
Yeah.
after I came out. But 32 years of suppressing yourself was a lot of suppression and acting the way other people wanted me to act
Mhm.
so they would like me and love me.
Everybody has a backstory that they think becomes their
Yeah.
lives. For me, I was adopted, so I was given up. I felt like I wasn't wanted, I wasn't loved, I was abandoned.
Yes,
And
that's right.
so you make whatever that meaning of that story is part of how you either repress or create or make, and it's the meanings that you give it. And so I think for you, obviously being picked on for a Barbie, then you had to suppress it because you were afraid of a father that was going to hit you or beat you or whatever it was that he did. And then a mother who, by the way, loving, but didn't know how to control your
Yeah,
dad. She was
right.
afraid too because she didn't even want to be herself. And so then it was just but it was such an incredible story because at the same token, you have these siblings and this brother, and there was all of this love and happiness. And this trauma
That's
thing is complex because you can and I think what I have found so interesting in your work is you talk about like different parts of things. So like
yeah,
you can have trauma and be upset about something, and yet you can also be okay with the various part. Like it can be this and that. And
yes,
can you talk to us a little bit about the
100%.
various parts? Because I think when people think about therapy, some people don't want to go to therapy. The
Right.
idea of going to therapy 5 days a week for 11 years, somebody would go, wow, oh, whoa, whoa, yeah, he's an overachiever
No, thank
in
you. Yeah,
therapy. No, no, thank you. And there's some
yes,
people that won't even go ever at all. I mean, full disclosure, my
right.
husband does not want to go to talk therapy. He's not a
Yeah,
talk, would never go to talk therapy. He doesn't
right.
believe in it. But I but so what does one do when they're trying to figure out how to manage this and not knowing what to do with it? And then talk to me a little bit about these various parts.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's why we call it complex PTSD. Relational trauma is called complex PTSD because it's damn complicated. I mean, the reality is, it is like we had wonderful moments in my family growing up. We canned tomatoes every season as this big Italian tradition. We made wine every year, like 50 gallon barrels of wine. We went on amazing vacations. So it was so confusing for me as a kid to have this beautiful Italian ethnic family whom I loved, who we had great times with. And then at other moments, it was horrific. I'm running through the house, my dad's screaming and swearing at me, locking myself in the bedroom to try to save my life. So the reality is, most trauma is extremely complicated. And what we end up doing is we compartmentalize them into different parts of ourselves. Like there's a part of me that is this little boy who's terrified. There's another part of me who's super competent and capable and smart and can get shit done. You know what I mean? So we all have the complexity, and it makes it really difficult for kids to sort it out because kids don't have the capacity to understand this when this complexity is happening. What ends up happening, and I did this myself, I describe it in the book, you mentioned this earlier, is when we're the recipient of dysfunction, we internalize the
Right.
good and the bad, right? And so what I ended up doing, I was like, I internalized the good, I did all the right things, and I internalized the bad. I
Mm.
describe this in the book, and it's super important for me, Heidi, for people to get this. That when I married my wife, right, I replicated my parents. I
Right.
was controlling and
Yep.
verbally abusive at times, just like my father, to
Yeah.
my wife, who
Yeah.
my ex-wife, who was passive and accommodating, just like my mom.
Sure.
And when
Yes.
I saw my very history being replayed in myself, I had so much self-loathing and shame. I'm like, how could you be the very thing that you tried so hard to get away from? But it
Mm.
happens to all of us. We pick people to try to get redemption from our histories. So
Say that again. Say that
yeah,
again. Yeah,
pick
and explain, like,
people.
do people know how that they're picking people that way?
No,
Explain more.
we pick
The big
people
one.
because we're trying to get redemption from our histories, and it's largely unconscious. I hate to tell people this, Heidi, but that's what attraction is. We
Ah,
attract people who have similar wounds as we do, but it's totally unconscious. Like everybody thinks opposites attract, like an extroverts with an
right.
introvert. That is true. And we attract people who have similar wounds because the intimacy, the unspoken contract in intimate relationships is I'll heal yours if
You
you
help
heal
mine.
mine,
Yep.
right? And boy,
I
does that not work. I did it with a woman. Boy, does that not work. It's why there's a 50% divorce rate. That's
Yeah.
why.
Well, I
I
wonder,
did it.
we should try to change away, like, shouldn't there be some new contract or some new rules of
Yeah,
there needs to be can't you come up with some steps, Frank, that people need to think about before? Like,
yeah,
it shouldn't there be an audit of someone's trauma
100%.
before they're into something? Like, the same way with parenting, it's like it's the only thing that doesn't have something for a
Right,
certificate. Like, there's no,
exactly.
like, you go to get a license, you have to go to driver's ed to become a driver. But in
Yeah.
parenting, they throw you in and out, and you come with all your baggage and the baggage of your partner and whatever came before you. Shouldn't it be that you take care of you before you are in it for someone else?
Yeah.
And look at our children, they're like being destroyed by so much of this.
100%, 100%. A couple things I want to say about it. One is you said something really important. Not everybody can go to therapy or wants to go to therapy. So it's
Right.
the main purpose that I'm driven to help trauma healing in the world. It's why I started the Trauma Institute and Trauma Informed Media to educate the general public about this stuff. It was very fascinating for me when I went to Thailand years ago with my husband, my now husband. We went on a trip, and all the men in Thailand needed to go in to become a monk, go to the monastery for 2 years at 18 years of age, because they were supposed to go introspective, learn about themselves so they can be good fathers. And I was like, that's a brilliant idea. Why don't all of us learn about ourselves before we get involved in relationships that we kind of perpetuate? Now, the problem in Thailand is they didn't require the women to do it, just the men, right? I think everybody needed to do it.
Yeah, of
And
course.
yeah, I think we should actually look at ourselves and explore ourselves and heal some of our childhood wounding before we embark on these intimate relationships. Here's the problem, though, Heidi, and it's complicated, like we
A lot of
said.
people don't know
This
they
is
even
the way,
have anything. So many people are
right.
like, there's
And
nothing wrong with me, or they're like in complete,
exactly.
is it that they're in
That's right.
denial, or is it that they're just so stuck that they don't see it? Like
It, it's a little bit both.
or could there really just be people that are just like fabulous? Because I've represented some people, I've met some people, I've been experienced with some people that are just like, my life is perfect. And I'm just like, no, there can't be what?
Yeah. Just
There's
check
such a
in
thing.
with them. Check in with them in 5 or 10 years. Like, some people think their life is perfect, and look, obviously, there's a range of experiences that people have. I don't wanna, downplay the
No, of
significance of the
course.
range, right? But the reality is we learn through our relationships. So we can't just like heal everything and then start dating. We take each dating opportunity as a way to learn about our history, learn about ourselves. It's making that commitment too quickly that's problematic. I've been in several relationships now, and I look back like, thank goodness, because I learned a lot. The
Mhm.
problem happens when people are so disconnected, they're
Mhm.
not learning from their experiences, and they keep repeating them and repeating them. And yeah, educating the general public is what I want to do, to bring this trauma informed awareness like, hey, maybe my drinking has something to do, my trauma response has something to do with my history, maybe my overworking.
But I mean, I think the thing is, there is this moment, whether you're later in life or earlier in life, but I think when you're gonna have children, it becomes so much more clear, because I
Yes,
think our children are absolutely our lessons. I know you talked about that in your book as well,
yes,
because you went through what you did with your then wife, and then you got divorced, and then you and your husband had children, which was amazing, an amazing story. And I had 9 IVF cycles. You went through
right.
surrogacy. You had a whole surrogacy story that was like, again, like chilling. And then you got fortunate, you got to adopt a baby. I'm adopted, so I just felt so many similarities to
That's right.
you even though we have totally different backgrounds, total different upbringings. I think, for me, I was more, my father was absent. He was a cab driver, but he was amazing. He owned a Jewish deli. My mother was so embarrassed that he was a cab driver that she didn't even tell me that he drove a cab until one of my friends said, "Oh, your dad picked me up in a cab." I'm like, "I thought my father sold institutional food and had a Jewish deli." Like, I didn't, that's how bad it,
Right, right.
it was
So
kind of crazy, but I never really even thought. And then for me, like, so as I'm going through all these things and I'm reading your book, I'm like, but I still, I'm telling you, Frank, I felt
that's
like all you weren't specific about all of the feelings, but you allowed there to be, it's like you gave permission for people to feel through your story that they weren't alone. So I'm
ah,
telling you, I did feel that while I went through the various things. I did. It was really extraordinary.
I love that so much. Like that brings a tear to my eye, Heidi. Honestly, it brings a tear to my eye. It warms my heart to hear you say that, because these themes are not about Frank Anderson. I
Right.
promise everyone that these are universal
Yeah.
themes, right? We recreate our histories. We are doing things because we hold shame and we're hiding who we are. Like, we do anything we can to be loved and accepted. These are universal themes. So I love what you're saying, that you read my story and you saw yourself in it. That was the whole point of this. Like, when the publisher said, write a memoir, I'm like, you're crazy. Like, why would I write a memoir? And they're like, Frank, your story can help people heal. And that's really the greatest gift for me of this book, right? And the other thing I want to say is, each opportunity, each failure, each time we mess up is an opportunity to learn and grow. I could never have been here today without the persistent drive I had. We call it resilience, to
Mhm.
keep learning and keep growing and keep learning and keep growing. When I started replicating, as you said, my
Mhm.
father's behavior with my kids, it was the first time in my life I was suicidal. I was like, I'd rather kill myself than do what was done to me. It was such a painful awareness of like, oh my goodness, I had kids to
Mhm.
recreate love and acceptance in a way that I didn't have. And
Mhm.
here I'm recreating the trauma. It was a showstopper for me. It really stopped me in my tracks. And I'm like, back into therapy again, Frank. It was a third time. I'm like, I am not going to do this. And that's where most of my deep childhood healing happened, was when I started acting like my father to my 2 boys, right? That's
Mhm.
when I was like, "I will not do this." And I'm really grateful and lucky to say that
Was
I
gonna say,
did some recreating. Yes, I did, and I have apologized to my kids about it for sure, right? Repair is super important because kids will take responsibility for anything parents don't,
right,
right?
which is dangerous, which is super.
Totally dangerous. So I did a lot of apologizing, and now, like, I'm not my father anymore. I did release what I was carrying relative to him. And I do wanna talk about this piece, Heidi, because, the last 4 chapters of the book
Mhm.
written in real time. My
No,
dad
I
was
wanted to get to that with you. I mean, that was really,
Yes,
I definitely wanna talk about this because some people don't get as lucky as you were
right.
to be
That's right.
able to take a full circle moment. Just for those of you that haven't read the book, and I don't wanna give it all away because I want you to go buy the book, but when Frank went, so Frank, started his book in his childhood, and then he talks about his upbringing with his parents, and then he goes on to become a psychiatrist at Harvard, and then he gets married to a woman that he loves and has a real loving relationship with her, and it was an incredible relationship. And he starts to find that starts acting like his father in some of the ways that his father treated his mother, and then he was treating the wife like his father treated the mother, and the wife was a lot like how his mother was. So he was
Totally.
recreating the scenario that he had known about until he finally started to cruise and explore and be dishonest,
Totally.
but even to himself, he did not want to know the truth. When he was younger, his parents were putting him through conversion therapy to try to make him not gay, even if he was gay. They didn't even, I think, want to even admit or even
No.
say that he was gay, just because he was playing with a Barbie. He didn't even know why he was in therapy or why he was forced to go. And he spent his whole life trying to want to fix and change other people, but not really look at himself until this one moment finally where he admitted, I really, I'm gay. I want to go. I have to be honest. He freed himself a lot by telling that to both of his parents, and then getting remarried. And then he had children, and he had a whole thing go on with the two of them. And then as this book was being written,
Yes.
Frank's father got sick. So that's where we are. Go ahead,
That's
Frank.
exactly right. Yeah, that was so profound. So I had done a lot of work. I was in therapy working on the ways I wasn't going to be like my father with my boys. Transgenerational trauma, as we talk about it, it's so common, right? I'm like, I'm going to break this cycle. And then my dad gets sick. He had a bunch of back trouble. He had back surgeries. He had rheumatoid arthritis, and he developed pulmonary fibrosis because of COVID, and he started failing. And so we started, all my siblings and I started taking care of him. And I would go in to help my sisters who lived near my dad help him. He was failing physically. My mother was totally overwhelmed taking care of him. And I did not expect another whole layer of healing to happen in my time spent with him. I felt pretty good about myself. I reconnected with my family. I had a good enough relationship with him, but as he was failing, there was something that got stirred up in me. It was the contrast between the monster of my childhood and this frail old man. He was like 110 pounds. And here I am taking care of this frail man. It was the first time I felt true compassion for him. It was very powerful for me. I was like, oh my goodness, this man now is not the same man who was a monster to me as in my childhood. So I'd go visit him and then I'd write. I'd go visit him and then I'd write. And I'll tell you, not to spoil the story, but we had incredible moments. Oh my God, I can even feel it now at the
Beautiful.
end of life, Heidi, that I never thought in a million years I would be able to experience. Honestly, it was the last words he said to me were the moments that I actually felt love from him for the first time in my life, and it was such a gift for me. I will never, ever forget that, ever. And what
Mhm.
ended up happening, which was shocking to me, is feeling the love from someone who hurt me and harmed me so much allowed me to feel love for him and allowed me to forgive my father truly from my heart for all that he had done to me. Now, I know everybody doesn't get that opportunity or even choose to forgive someone who has harmed them. I had a gift, right?
Mhm.
He said stuff to me that was loving. I was open enough to feel it because
Yes.
of the work I had done. And then the other thing, so loving your perpetrator is one of the most freeing experiences you can have because you're no longer affected at all by it. You're truly free. And the last thing I'll say about this, which was shocking, even more so, was then I was able to forgive myself for what I had done to myself, to my kids, to my ex-wife. So it was in forgiving him that I was enabled to forgive I enabled myself to forgive me for what I had done. And that was talk about full circle because the reality is we've all harmed and we've all been harmed. So this healing journey for me has been spectacular beyond my wildest expectations. And I want everyone to know it is possible for you too. It's possible. If I could do it, you could do it. And I'll devote the rest of my life teaching you how to do it. Healing trauma is about releasing what you're carrying based on what happened to you.
To
You're
you.
carrying stuff that doesn't belong to you that you can release.
I
That's what healing trauma is. Forgiveness is about releasing the relational feelings you have about the person who harmed you. So those are 2 different things. You can heal trauma and release what you're carrying, and then you make a choice or not to release the feelings you're holding about the relationship with the person who harmed you. The thing that people don't understand is forgiveness is not really about the other person.
mm,
Forgiveness is about you letting go of what you're carrying about them. It's not for them, and it's not condoning what they did.
mm,
It's you letting go of what you're carrying about them. It's
mm.
a choice though, right? It's always a choice. So I want people to know there's a lot of options, and you can take this to any level and degree that you want to.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, is there anything with grief and trauma? I'm
Mhm.
wondering if there's anything like, I had an incredible relationship with my father, but when he got sick, I mean, the whole idea that he wasn't going to be here anymore was
Right.
shocking, even though, like, that people die. I think because I had all this magical thinking growing up, which saved me, you know,
Yes,
I guess I just figured I can fix things, I could get people on this show, that show, do this thing, that thing,
that's right.
I would fix this,
Yeah.
but I couldn't. And obviously nobody can. But when he died, it was traumatic in that I was like, oh no, I'm going to be left with my mother, who I don't have as great of a relationship
Right.
with as my father.
Mhm.
So it's more like, oh no. And she has become extraordinary. So, and he said, she's going to be wonderful. Don't worry. She's mad at me, not you. And like, the
Wow.
whole healing,
Yeah,
like for all of it, it's been amazing. But during the grief
right.
process, it was really intense. I mean, for me, I mean, I was shared. I drank because I didn't want to
Yeah,
deal.
that's right.
I didn't want to feel.
Yeah,
And I didn't know that I was doing that for that purpose or
right.
reason. But to your point about overwhelming feelings,
Yeah,
I think I was more overwhelmed than I ever was in probably my entire life.
that's right. Well, because the fact is grief and relational trauma go hand in
They
hand.
do. I had a
They
feeling.
really do they go hand in hand, and I love, by the way, that this book has helped you
Oh, yeah.
review your life and heal some of the stuff and have awareness of your behaviors like that. I love that so much, that it
Oh,
has
so
affected
much.
you.
And the songs, like, oh, we gotta get to that. Don't let me forget that. I gotta get to, like, for in each chapter, Frank has lyrics of different songs. He created a playlist to help him heal his trauma. And some of the songs are amazing because when I read them versus hear them, I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that Aerosmith, Dream On had this thing, or REO Speedwagon, who I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit too.
Music has always well, before we get into the music, let me
Yes.
go back to the grief thing. What people don't understand, and I didn't understand this for years, I was somebody who would watch a sad movie and burst into tears,
Oh yeah,
and
me
I'm
too.
like,
Me too.
nobody died in my like, nobody close to me died. Why do I feel this? But
Yeah.
what people don't understand is that each time you experience a relational trauma, you lose the safe person. So
Oh,
there's this accumulative loss. Every time my dad got drunk, or every time my dad yelled and screamed at me, I lost a safe parent. So it was over and over and over again. So you accumulate all these losses relationally, even if the person's there. When
mm,
they're the drunk person's like, "I'm so sorry," right? Like, when they're screaming and yelling at you, the next day, they're like, "I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again." So, people don't realize that relational trauma is rooted in enormous grief. So we are so sensitive to loss because we've experienced
so much of
tons
it.
of loss
So much of it.
cumulatively over time. Yeah, and
But
that so
without even thinking of it, that's a really interesting point, Frank, because some people like haven't like lost a loved one like to
yeah,
death, but you
yes,
lose a connection,
yeah,
even if a person's present, but they're
yeah,
kind of
not
distant,
there. Yeah,
you feel a loss. Or if you've moved, even though the people that you move from aren't dead
yes,
or gone, it's just a change. So,
yeah.
like, there could be loss in things, people, emotions, and feelings. And that can then make somebody feel grief
Grief,
and
alone,
alone.
neglected,
Different,
abandoned.
different in a so
Yeah,
here was the big aha for me.
yeah,
Like, here I was thinking I was like this special person that felt abandoned in her life.
right.
And like, first of all, I
Yeah,
wasn't even abandoned. I found out that, I mean, I found my biological
yeah,
mother, and I have half sister and half brother. I found out that I was brought home. Like, who knew that? Like, who even knew
wow,
that I lived? Imagine those siblings. They actually had it worse than I did because they had to like deal with all of that and
yeah,
have to stay living with a woman that gave up her child
yeah,
that didn't want to, or that couldn't take care of her. And,
that's right.
and they lived to tell the story how lucky I was. And I was. So it's just at the end of the day, you learn about these various things, but you don't think about them. And you do think that
No,
it's just you. And so I
right.
think your book also, and your messages for sure, have taught me everybody has this. Like, so,
Everybody's had a version.
and you don't even though, like, I'm this self-help best-selling book publicist, and I get people on this show and that show, the other show, and I've done this, that, and I'm this happy Heidi, it's
You
okay
know,
that I have had that's a part of me. But
that's
then
right.
there's also this other part of me that had this thing that I'm allowed to have felt and talked
Yeah,
about and gone through and spoken of, and the choices that I made, and I'm still going through. I have a
mm,
13-year-old. I'm sure I'm going to go through a lot more. And for me, like, I know personally, I'm just so grateful, to you.
yeah,
So I think that there should be, is there like certain steps, that like real
yeah,
tips we can like give to people that are suffering or struggling from trauma, and how, and how they get past that? And then also, I wanted to ask you too, like, as you go through this, the one thing that I think has been very big for me is learning about boundaries,
yeah,
like the things that like, if something's not serving me, or someone's done something or to me that, or it doesn't feel right anymore. It's not like I'm just getting rid of them and not speaking to them anymore. I'm just very verbal and open, like, that didn't feel good. I don't, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that, right? I mean, is that okay to do to?
Totally. So a couple things. One is, yeah, most people who experience that relational violation are not
Yes,
good at
that's good.
boundaries. Are not good at boundaries because your boundaries were violated by a
Mm.
parent or
Were you
something. So
ever taught boundaries, or most people that go
no,
through this?
most not with people that go through the dysfunctional families weren't taught appropriate boundaries. Your boundaries were violated. So
Mm,
I like to think about boundaries as healthy no's.
mm,
It's a healthy no. Like, no, that doesn't work for me. No, that doesn't feel good to me. What most people experience instead of boundaries is attacking anger. You're bad, you're wrong, you're no good, instead of, no, this is not okay with me. No, I'm not going to do that. No, this doesn't align with what feels right for me. So boundaries are
mm,
learning how to regain your power when
mm.
something doesn't feel right, and you could say no. So people
Yeah.
don't understand that, and it's everybody who's gone through kind of complex PTSD has
Mm.
trouble with boundaries.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
part of the thing. The
Well, I
other
definitely
thing.
had complex PTSD from being in Maui with the fires, and
Yes.
also living in Maui, on an island for 4 years, just myself, Darren, and Kaden, in isolation in a way. And it definitely brought up for me, feelings that I think I never felt of not belonging,
Yes, that's right.
or
Yeah,
feeling wanted.
yeah.
And I think, like, I felt that through Caden's not feeling wanted, and then me not feeling wanted for him, and then not feeling wanted for me, and so I think it definitely, but I'm grateful for it, to be
Right.
honest. And
Beautiful.
I live to tell it now. Like, I got out of there. I mean, I'm not grateful for that little punk kid that did what he
Yeah.
did on Snapchat, and believe me, he'll get his, because whoever allows that kind of behavior to happen in a household or even in a school system, although the school did as best as they could, it's just way better to, like, not be a
Well,
part of
let
the thing.
me say something that
It's
you
good to
spoke.
walk away. It's good to walk away.
Well, and you can now because you've worked on your history. Like, it's very common for something to happen to our children, like happened for Caden, to activate our own histories. And
Mm,
because we tend to push our pain away, we
mm,
don't have that awareness. But what
mm,
you did was
mm,
you saw the bullying that he experienced.
mhm.
It activated within you your feeling alone and not wanted because of your history, but
Mhm.
instead of pushing that away and blaming him,
Mm-mm.
you did the U-turn and
Oh,
you
yeah.
started looking at the origins, so it allows you to interact differently, right? If you
Yeah.
keep suppressing and pushing it away, you're gonna if you keep suppressing, you will keep perpetuating. That's what we do. If you take advantage of the moment just like you did and said, "Oh my goodness, this bullying really stirred up something in me. What is it? Let me learn about it."
Mhm.
Then we can heal and make different decisions. We talked about breaking the trauma cycle. Okay. The 4 T's to trauma healing. And this is one of the things I'm trying to teach people who are in the general public and who can't afford therapy how to heal trauma. First is thank your trauma response. Remember, those trauma responses are actually ways of trying to protect you. So appreciate them. Don't try to get rid of them. All the responses, like anxiety, depression, overworking, even yelling at your kids and suicidality.
Mm,
Those are trauma responses. We should thank them and appreciate them. The next T is trust that you have within you what you need to heal. We're
mm,
all born with intuition, internal wisdom. We all have the capacity to create safe relationships. And you have to get reconnected with that in order to heal your trauma. The third T is transform. This is where the real healing happens of the wounded parts of you that hold the trauma. First, the story and experience needs to be witnessed. You need to share your experience with someone you feel safe with. Second, have a corrective experience. We want the parts that are traumatized to feel loved and seen, heard, and known in a way that they didn't have with their trauma. That allows them to release and let go of all the stuff they're carrying. Release and transformation is possible in trauma. And the fourth T is take back your power. This
Mm.
is where once your trauma is released, you take back your power. You take back agency of your own life. You can make decisions to say no and set boundaries. You can choose to forgive someone or not based on what they did to you. That is the ultimate freedom when we take back our power. So I want people to know about these steps, that it's possible for all of you, that healing is truly happen. Healing can truly happen in trauma.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Frank, for being here with us today and being so candid and just being so authentic and sharing so many of these tips and having this book and having faith in Krupp and us and
Yes.
posting it and sharing it with the world. We're super super excited by it. We know that, like I've said, everything that's ever come to us has come when we've needed it most. This has been, the timing of this could not have been more perfect for me. I personally thank you. I professionally thank you. And I know that you're going to help so many people, which makes us feel so great to continue to be catalysts for that. So keep doing the work. Everybody go buy To Be Loved. Please join the virtual summit on May 6th and go get this book, pre-order it, go get it on May 7th. And thank you very much, Dr. Frank. Have a
Thank you so
great
much for having
day.
me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you too. You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.